Jake had no idea that his backyard, his personal sanctuary, was about to become the center of an all-out war. The first sign of trouble came when he stepped outside one morning, coffee in hand, to find a group of kids running across his perfectly manicured lawn. A couple sat on a blanket under his favorite oak tree, casually munching on sandwiches as if they were in a public park. Confused, Jake called out, can I help you?" The parents barely glanced at him. One of them waved lazily. "Oh, we're just enjoying the new park. Great spot, by the way." Jake frowned. New park. Then he saw it. The sign stood right by his back gate, a bright green placard with bold white lettering that read, "Community Park, open to residents." His stomach dropped. He marched across the yard, snatched the sign out of the ground, and stared at it in disbelief. This had to be a mistake. He hadn't agreed to anything like this. He had lived in this neighborhood for years, always refusing to join the HOA because he wanted nothing to do with their ridiculous rules and power trips. And now they were claiming his backyard as a public space. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar, grating voice. "Oh, good morning, Jake. I see you've noticed our little project." He turned to see her. It was Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, the kind of person who thrived on rules and wielded HOA regulations like a medieval sword. She stood at the edge of his yard, arms crossed, her smug smile firmly in place. "Karen," Jake said, holding up the sign. "What the hell is this?" She sighed dramatically, as if explaining something to a child. "We had a community meeting last week. Everyone agreed that your backyard would make a lovely park, and since it's been so underutilized, we decided to." Underutilized? Jake nearly choked on his words. "It's my private property." "Well," she continued smoothly, "technically yes. But as you're not part of the HOA, there were some discussions about how best to incorporate this unused space for the good of the community." Jake stared at her, stunned. "You can't just take my yard." Karen gave a condescending chuckle. "Oh, we're not taking it. We're just making it more accessible." Jake clenched his jaw. "Take the sign down, Karen." "Oh, I wouldn't do that," she warned. "We have approval." "From who?" "The HOA board, of course." "That's not legal." Karen shrugged. "If you had joined the HOA, you'd be aware of how these things work. You should really consider participating in community decisions, Jake." With that, she turned and walked off, leaving Jake standing there, gripping the sign so tightly his knuckles turned white. That night, he removed the sign and tossed it in the trash. But by the next morning, a new one had taken its place, bigger, with sturdier posts cemented into the ground. Jake's blood boiled. It was clear Karen wasn't going to back down. She wasn't just being a nuisance. She was actively trying to claim his land. By the end of the day, things escalated. He came home to find his backyard filled with people, some setting up folding chairs, others playing frisbee. A group of moms was chatting on his patio furniture like they owned the place. Jake stormed toward them. "Excuse me, but what the hell do you think you're doing?" A woman turned to him with a surprised expression. "Oh, Karen said this was community space now." "She's wrong," Jake snapped. "This is private property. My property." The woman looked uncomfortable, but before she could respond, Karen reappeared, flanked by two other HOA members. "Jake," she said, exasperated, "you're being dramatic." "Get off my land," he growled. Karen shook her head in mock disappointment. "You really should be more neighborly." Jake took a deep breath. He needed to handle this smartly. "Fine," he said, forcing a calm voice. "If this is all legal, I'd like to see the paperwork." Karen's smile faltered for the briefest second, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, it's in the process of being finalized, so you don't actually have approval?" "It's a formality," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Jake folded his arms. "Then you're trespassing." Karen's smug expression slipped just a bit. The people on his patio began packing up. Jake pointed at the gate. Everyone now. Grumbling, the crowd dispersed. But as Karen left, she smirked and said, "You can't stop progress, Jake." That night, Jake did some digging. He read through property laws and zoning regulations. The HOA had no legal right to take his backyard. But there was a loophole. If he didn't use the land, they could argue it was an abandoned space and petition for control. He realized what Karen was trying to do. If she could make it seem like public land and he didn't fight back hard enough, she might actually succeed. Over the next week, the HOA went on the offensive. Passive-aggressive letters started arriving at his door. First, polite requests. "Jake, please consider opening your yard to the community. It would mean so much." Then the pressure escalated. "As a homeowner, you have a responsibility to contribute to the neighborhood's well-being." And finally, outright threats. Failure to comply with community expectations may result in a formal review. Jake also noticed small but insidious acts of sabotage. His backyard gate was left open, his trash cans mysteriously disappeared, and his garden hose was sliced clean through. He set up cameras, catching Karen herself sneaking into his yard late at night, replacing the sign yet again. The next morning, when Jake confronted her with video evidence, she scoffed. "Oh, grow up, Jake. You're being ridiculous." That's when he knew Karen wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. And that meant he had to do something drastic. If she wanted a public park, he'd give her one, but not the one she was expecting. Jake spent the entire night stewing over Karen's audacity. She wasn't just being a nuisance. She was actively scheming to take his land. He had always known she was power-hungry, but this was a new level of insanity. If she thought he would roll over and let her steal his backyard, she had another thing coming. The next morning, he walked out onto his deck, surveying the scene. The morning dew glistened on the grass, and birds chirped in the trees, but something felt off. He walked the perimeter of his fence and found the latest sign, this one bolted to a wooden post dug deep into the ground. Karen was getting bolder. Instead of immediately ripping it out, he grabbed his phone and took a picture. He was going to need all the evidence he could get. Then, with a swift kick, he sent the sign toppling over, snapping it in half for good measure. By noon, he received the inevitable knock on his door. Karen stood there, arms crossed. An expression of forced politeness stretched across her face. "Morning, Jake. I see you removed the sign again." "Good observation," he replied flatly. She sighed dramatically, as if exhausted by his stubbornness. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. This park is for the community." "No, it's my backyard. And if you set foot on it again, I'll press trespassing charges." Her smile tightened, but she didn't waver. The HOA has the authority to repurpose and use land for community enhancement. Not without the owner's consent, Jake shot back. "And I never consented." Karen shrugged. "We'll see. We have ways of ensuring the best interests of the neighborhood are met." With that ominous statement, she turned and walked away. Jake shut the door and immediately got on his computer. He needed to figure out exactly how far she could push this. After hours of digging, he uncovered an unsettling truth. While the HOA didn't have direct power over his property, they could make his life hell by weaponizing obscure bylaws. If they could convince enough residents that his backyard was neglected or not maintained in a manner befitting the community, they could argue for an annexation request. It was a loophole, but it was just slim enough that Karen might actually try it. The next few days were a nightmare. The HOA bombarded him with notices. "Your fence is not compliant with neighborhood standards. Your lawn is showing signs of overgrowth and must be trimmed. Your property has been identified as an ideal space for a neighborhood gathering area." The worst part? He started noticing more random visitors in his yard, strangers, people from other streets. One afternoon, he caught a man setting up a barbecue grill on his patio as if it were a public picnic space. Jake stormed outside. "Hey, who the hell are you?" The man barely looked up. "Just grilling." Karen said it was fine. Jake clenched his fist. "Well, I say it's not. Get out." The man gave him a look like he was the unreasonable one, but slowly packed up his stuff and left. Furious, Jake marched straight to Karen's house and knocked hard on the door. She answered with an insufferably fake smile. "Jake, what a surprise." He held up his phone, playing the footage of the guy grilling in his backyard. "You're telling people they can just waltz onto my property now?" Karen shrugged. "I simply let people know that the space is available for use." Jake could feel his blood boiling. "That's not your call." She cocked her head. "Then use the space, Jake. Show that it's actively being utilized. Otherwise, well, I can't control what the board decides." That was it. That was her entire strategy. Force him to abandon the land so the HOA could claim it. She thought she was smart. She thought she had him trapped. But Jake had other plans. That night, as he sat on his deck staring at his backyard, an idea began forming. If Karen wanted to treat his yard like a public park, he'd turn it into something the neighborhood would hate. He spent hours researching. What was the worst possible thing he could legally do to his yard that would make it untouchable? Then he found it, a protected wetland. According to local zoning laws, if an area became classified as a natural wetland, it could not be developed, altered, or repurposed. And the best part? The process didn't require some long government approval process. It just needed the right environmental conditions. Jake grinned. He could make this work. The next morning, he made a few key purchases, Several large tarps and waterproof barriers, a series of underground irrigation pipes, native wetland plants and seeds, and hundreds of tadpoles and frogs from a local supplier. If Karen wanted a public space, she was about to get a swamp. Over the next week, Jake worked tirelessly. He rerouted sections of his sprinkler system, subtly overwatering specific areas to create mushy, soggy ground. He spread out the tarps beneath layers of dirt to trap water. He dug small, shallow ponds that naturally attracted standing water, the perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. But the master stroke? The frogs. He released dozens of them, knowing they'd multiply fast. Frogs were protected under local wildlife laws. If enough of them took up residence, his yard would legally become a wetland, making it untouchable by the HOA. By the time Karen noticed, it was too late. She stormed onto his driveway one evening, her face red with rage. "Jake, what the hell did you do to your yard?" Jake feigned innocence. "Oh, just making some improvements." "It's a disaster," she shrieked. "It's a mosquito-infested swamp." He scratched his chin. "I prefer to call it a nature reserve." Karen looked like she was about to explode. "You can't just flood your yard like this." Jake grinned. "Actually, I can. And thanks to the local conservation laws, the HOA can't touch it now." She sputtered. This is sabotage." He shrugged. "No, this is me making use of my land. You said I wasn't utilizing it, right? Well, now I am." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew she had lost this round. But Jake also knew Karen wouldn't give up so easily, and that meant he had to be ready for her next move. The transformation of Jake's backyard into a swamp was progressing faster than even he had anticipated. The waterlogged ground was now a soggy mess, and the tadpoles had started hatching into small, chirping frogs. Mosquitoes, drawn to the standing water, buzzed in swarms, making the air thick with an incessant hum. It was perfect, a wetland nightmare that Karen and the HOA would never be able to reclaim. The first real test came when a group of kids, unaware of the changes, tried to run into the yard as they had been doing for weeks. The moment their shoes sank into the muddy terrain, they let out high-pitched yelps, struggling to pull their feet free. One kid managed to extract himself with a sickening squelch, his once white sneakers now covered in thick brown sludge. His mother, who had been standing nearby chatting with another resident, screamed in horror when she saw the mess. Karen arrived moments later, storming up to Jake's front door, rage radiating off her like a heat wave. "You're out of control, Jake," she snapped the moment he opened the door. "This is absolutely unacceptable. The mosquitoes, the smell. Your backyard is a disaster." Jake took a slow sip from his coffee, pretending to think. Sounds like nature." She jabbed a finger at him. "This is an act of vandalism against the community." Jake leaned casually against the doorframe. "No, Karen. This is land conservation." Her face twisted with disbelief. "You're joking." Jake pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. "Nope. Just got off the phone with an environmental consultant. Turns out, with the number of native plants I've introduced and the wildlife that's already settling in, my yard qualifies as a wetland under local zoning regulations." He smiled. "That means the HOA has no jurisdiction over it." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That can't be right." Jake shrugged. "You can take it up with the county, but I doubt they'll side with you. Conservation is a big deal these days." She stared at him, seething. He could see the gears in her head spinning, trying to figure out how to regain control. But Jake wasn't done yet. "Also, Karen," he said, pretending to remember something. "Since it's a wetland now, that means no construction, no landscaping, and no public use. In fact, the HOA could get fined if they try to interfere." She paled. "What?" "Yeah," Jake said, barely containing his grin. "It's now protected land." Karen stood there stunned. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed away. It wasn't long before the neighborhood backlash began. The mosquito population exploded, making any outdoor gathering unbearable. The frogs were loud, croaking all night long, their calls echoing across the neighborhood. The smell of stagnant water mixed with rotting plant matter hung thick in the air. Neighbors started complaining loudly. At first, they went to Karen. After all, she had been the one pushing for Jake's yard to become a community space. But when she admitted that the HOA now couldn't touch it, their frustration turned on her. "You said this would be a park," one woman yelled at her during an HOA meeting. "Now my backyard smells like a swamp. I can't even sit outside anymore." Another resident complained. "The mosquitoes are everywhere. My kids have nightmares because of the frogs," a man added. Karen, who was usually in complete control of the HOA meetings, looked visibly rattled. "We are working on a solution," she said through clenched teeth. "What solution?" someone demanded. "We can't do anything. It's protected land." That was the moment Jake knew he had won. But Karen wasn't done fighting. A few days later, Jake noticed something strange. His backyard, which had been completely undisturbed for weeks, had a new, small trench leading toward the storm drain. Someone had tried to drain the swamp. Jake reviewed his security footage, and sure enough, there she was, Karen, in the dead of night, shovel in hand, trying to dig a drainage ditch. He couldn't believe it. She had snuck into his yard in the middle of the night like some kind of HOA burglar. Jake didn't hesitate. He called the police. When the cops arrived, Karen was still there, covered in mud, panting as she tried to shovel water out of a literal swamp. The officers shined their flashlights on her. "Ma'am, what exactly are you doing?" Karen straightened, her face flushing. This man has created an environmental hazard. He's making our neighborhood unlivable." The officer looked down at the thick, murky water. "This is private property." "It used to be," she snapped. "He abandoned it. He let it turn into this." Jake stepped forward, arms crossed. "Actually, it's a legally protected wetland. And you, Karen, are trespassing." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, is that true?" Karen hesitated. Then, realizing she was caught, she dropped the shovel. "This isn't fair," she muttered. Jake grinned. "Neither was trying to steal my land." The officers didn't arrest her, but they escorted her off the property and filed an official trespassing report. The next day, the story spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. The once untouchable HOA queen had been caught breaking the law. With Karen disgraced and the HOA desperate to fix their mistake, they backed off completely. No more public park nonsense. No more signs. No more letters. The neighborhood turned against her, blaming her for the mosquito invasion and the swamp fiasco. People started skipping HOA meetings. A few even took down their own fences, declaring themselves Karen-free zones. It was beautiful, but the best part? A local environmental group got wind of Jake's wetland preservation efforts. They loved it. They offered to officially register it as a conservation site, bringing in specialists to help manage it properly. Soon, the swamp started transforming into something amazing. They added lily pads, flowering wetland plants, and natural drainage to control the water levels. Butterflies and dragonflies replaced the mosquitoes. Even the frogs became a charming neighborhood attraction, except for Karen, who still glared at them every time she walked by. Jake leaned on his deck, watching as a group of conservationists installed wooden markers that read, "Protected wetland habitat. Do not disturb." Karen had wanted a park. Well, she got one hell of a nature preserve instead. The swamp had started as a joke, a way to flip the script on Karen and her ridiculous land grab. But now it was taking on a life of its own. What was once a muddy, mosquito-infested mess was slowly turning into something oddly beautiful. The environmental group had sent volunteers to stabilize the area, adding natural drainage paths, and planting a variety of wetland vegetation that helped filter the water. They even installed a small wooden sign near Jake's fence that read, "Protected wetland habitat. Do not disturb." Karen, of course, was furious. The neighborhood, however, was divided. Some residents, still bitter about the mosquito invasion, blamed her for the entire debacle. Others had started to embrace the swamp, treating it like a quirky, unexpected feature of the community. A few kids even found it cool, sneaking over to watch the frogs and dragonflies that now populated the wetland. Jake sat on his porch sipping a beer as he listened to the not-so-subtle argument unfolding on Karen's front lawn. "You pushed for the park, Karen," one of the HOA members said, exasperated. "You practically forced the idea down our throats. Now look what's happened." "It was supposed to be a community space," Karen snapped. "Not this." A man scoffed. "Well, congratulations. You got the exact opposite of what you wanted." Jake couldn't help but chuckle. Karen had spent years controlling every aspect of this neighborhood, and now, for the first time, she was watching everything slip through her fingers. Her influence was fading, and she knew it. But she wasn't done fighting back. A week later, Jake found an official notice taped to his door. HOA citation, public nuisance complaint. He laughed out loud. Karen's final act of desperation. The letter claimed that the foul odor, excessive noise from the wildlife, and unkempt appearance of his backyard had created an unlivable environment for his neighbors. The HOA was demanding that he restore the property to its original condition or face escalating fines. Jake grabbed his phone, took a deep breath, and dialed a number. It rang twice before the enthusiastic voice of his environmental contact answered. "Hey Jake, what's up?" "Oh, just got a complaint from my friendly neighborhood HOA about my public nuisance." His contact let out a laugh. "Oh man, are they still at it? Don't worry, Harry. We've got your back. Legally, that land is now a protected wetland area. Any attempt to destroy or alter it could result in serious fines for them." Jake grinned. "That's what I was hoping to hear." He wasted no time in crafting a response. The next morning, Karen and the HOA received an official letter from the county's Environmental Protection Agency, warning them that any attempts to interfere with the wetland could result in legal consequences. It was game over, or at least Jake thought it was. Karen had one more trick up her sleeve. Late one night, Jake was woken by the sound of splashing. At first, he thought it was just the frogs, but then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of shovels scraping against wet soil. He bolted out of bed, grabbed his phone, and switched on his backyard floodlights. And there she was, Karen, up to her knees in the swamp, frantically trying to drain the water with a bucket. For a few seconds, Jake just stood there in stunned silence, watching as she floundered in the mud, her once pristine yoga pants stained beyond repair. Then she noticed him. "You," she shrieked, pointing at him with a mud-covered hand. "You think you've won?" Jake fought back laughter. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" "I'm fixing your mess," she screeched, splashing water everywhere as she struggled to move. Jake shook his head. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't just my yard anymore. It's a legally protected wetland. You're the one breaking the law." Karen was too far gone to care. She lunged forward, trying to march through the swamp like a woman on a mission, but her foot sank deep into the mud. She yelped, trying to pull herself free, but the more she struggled, the deeper she sank. Jake held up his phone. "I should probably call someone." Karen froze. "You wouldn't." He shrugged. "I mean, trespassing is trespassing." Her expression twisted into pure rage. "You ruined this neighborhood. You turned it into a damn zoo." Jake smirked. "I thought you wanted a public space." Karen let out a frustrated scream and tried to take another step, only to fall forward, face first into the swamp. Jake bit his lip, failing, not to laugh. Karen slowly sat up, completely drenched in mud and swamp water, strands of hair sticking to her face. Her perfect suburban image was destroyed. That was when the first porch light flicked on, then another and another. Soon, half the neighborhood was standing outside, drawn by the noise. A few people gasped. Someone started laughing. One of the HOA members shook their head. "Jesus, Karen." Karen, humiliated, stumbled to her feet. Fuming, in absolute silence, she pushed past the gathering crowd, marching home without another word. Jake leaned on his fence, watching as she disappeared inside. The war was officially over. By morning, the HOA dropped the nuisance complaint. By the end of the week, Karen had resigned as HOA president, and by the end of the month, she moved out of the neighborhood entirely. The HOA, desperate to save face, tried to make amends with Jake. They offered to cooperate with him on future decisions regarding his yard. Jake just grinned. "Nah, I think I'll handle my property on my own." They never bothered him again. And as for the swamp, it thrived. Jake made peace with it, enjoying his new status as the accidental protector of a wetland. He even started getting visitors, nature lovers who wanted to observe the frogs, photographers capturing the beauty of the preserved land, and even school groups who used it as a lesson in environmental conservation. One day, as he sat on his deck, he noticed a new sign placed at the entrance to his backyard. "Jake's Swamp, a local conservation effort." He laughed. "The best revenge is letting nature take over." Jake never thought he'd become the guardian of a swamp, but there he was, sitting on his deck, watching as a group of environmental volunteers planted more native wetland flowers along the water's edge. The transformation had been surreal. What started as a spite-fueled act of rebellion had turned into a legitimate nature preserve, and people were starting to respect it. Well, most people. Karen, on the other hand, had vanished from neighborhood affairs entirely after her humiliating midnight swamp incident. She had tried unsuccessfully to repair her reputation. The problem was, no one took her seriously anymore. For years, she had ruled the HOA with an iron fist, but after the entire neighborhood witnessed her face-planting into a swamp, her authority crumbled. The next HOA meeting was a disaster for her. People openly questioned her leadership, pointing out that she had not only wasted HOA funds, but also created a problem that she then tried to fix by breaking the law. It didn't take long before the pressure became too much. Karen resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. But it didn't stop there. Less than a month later, the for sale sign appeared in front of her house. The neighborhood had turned against her. The people she once controlled with HOA violations and petty fines now avoided her like the plague. Parents still told stories about Karen's great swamp meltdown, and kids made up ghost stories about her muddy retreat. Jake knew she couldn't stand it. She couldn't live in a place where she wasn't in control. And so, one afternoon, he watched from his porch as a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. He saw her standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, glaring at her former domain. Jake considered letting her leave in peace. But then again, she never let him have peace. So he stood up, stretched, and called out, "Hey, Karen." She turned slowly, her expression darkening. "What?" Jake grinned. "You never did thank me for your public park." Her eye twitched. For a second, it looked like she wanted to scream at him, to give one final, Karen-style rant before disappearing forever. But then she just clenched her jaw, muttered something under her breath, and stormed into her car without another word. As her car disappeared down the street, Jake let out a deep breath. It was over, and he had won. With Karen gone, the HOA scrambled to clean up their reputation. They had lost the respect of the neighborhood, and their influence had been shattered. One of the first things they did? They stopped messing with Jake. No more letters, no more surprise violations, no more random people trespassing into his backyard. In fact, they even tried to be nice to him. "We'd love to work with you on future projects," the new HOA president told him one day, practically groveling. "Maybe even set up a small informational event about local conservation." Jake just smiled. "Yeah, I think I'll keep handling my property on my own." They got the message. The biggest surprise of all came a few months later when Jake got an official letter from the county's environmental board. At first, he thought, "Oh great, what now?" But when he opened it, he almost burst out laughing. The county had officially recognized his property as a protected wetland habitat. That meant no construction could ever take place on it. No landscaping companies could be hired to beautify it. And best of all, the HOA had absolutely zero authority over it. Jake had taken the one thing Karen wanted most, control, and buried it in 2 feet of swamp mud. The best part? People actually started to appreciate the swamp. What had once been a petty revenge project had turned into something valuable. Local schools started bringing students on small field trips, using the wetland as an educational opportunity. Photographers showed up to capture the surprising beauty of the ecosystem, especially in the mornings when the mist rose over the water, making the entire area look almost magical. A few of the neighbors even came around, telling Jake that they preferred the swamp over whatever Karen had planned. "At least now it's something unique," one woman told him. "Not just another boring park." One day, as Jake was out near the water's edge adjusting one of the wooden markers that the conservation team had installed, he saw one of his neighbors approach. It was the same guy who had once tried to have a barbecue in Jake's backyard back when Karen was in charge. The man hesitated before speaking. "Hey, I just wanted to say I think it's pretty cool what you did with this place." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You mean the swamp you were complaining about a few months ago?" The guy chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, well, turns out my kid loves frogs. She won't shut up about them." Jake smirked. "Well, the frogs are here to stay." The man nodded. "Yeah, I guess that's a good thing." They stood there for a moment, looking out over the water. Then, out of nowhere, a huge bullfrog let out the loudest, most obnoxious croak Jake had ever heard. The man jumped, startled. "Jesus, do they always do that?" Jake laughed. "Welcome to my backyard." That night, Jake sat on his deck, a beer in hand, watching the moonlight reflect off the swamp. The war was over. Karen was gone. The HOA was defeated. And his backyard? It had never been more alive. He pulled out his phone and took one last video for his personal record. As the camera panned across the thriving wetland, capturing the sounds of croaking frogs and rustling reeds, Jake spoke. "Well, Karen wanted a public park." He zoomed in on the official wetland sign, grinning. "She got one, just not the one she expected." With a satisfied chuckle, he ended the recording and leaned back in his chair. Game, set, swamp.